Welcome back from that quick break. Um, so, um, for the past couple of months, as you all know, I've been part of the research organizing team for the Youths That Matters Research Conference, and I've been particularly excited to chair this session and convincingly demonstrate to you all the impact that young people can actually make through STEM. We have some superb speakers today, and I think it will be a really meaningful session. Let's get started. There will be an opportunity for you to ask the speakers questions, everyone. So do pop in your questions in the Q&A and in the chat, and we'll get to them. All right. So there's no doubt that as a race, we are facing immense challenges, ranging from diseases and pandemics to the ever-increasing threat of climate change and the disparities in quality of life across the globe. Education inequities, poverty, pollution of the water, our corals dying. It is also frustrating, especially to young people. Something that personally frustrates me is that despite there being at least 13 vaccines approved for COVID-19 globally, which only started in 2019, we have no vaccines approved for HIV, the crisis of which started in the 1980s. What do we need to do to reduce disparities like this? Well, out-of-the-box thinking, creativity, a powerful spark, all of which we can find in none other than young people, passionate about research and leading the way to change the world for the better. So, today, I'm absolutely elated to be joined by 4 brilliant minds who are doing just that, taking us that step closer to a world with less disparities and inequities by sharing their knowledge and research with the world. All of our fantastic panel speakers have contributed to the Youths That Matters Journal through their research and are here to share with us their experience and passion for making a difference through STEM. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll hear about what each of them have done, the importance and significance of the research, and communicating it to the public, as well as why and how each of you in the audience can make just as powerful of an impact. So, let's get started with some introductions. Olayemi Bakara is a graduate of microbiology from Adekunle Ajasin University, Nigeria. He is passionate about research in the areas of plant-microbe interaction, microbial ecology, and environmental microbiology. He has authored science communication articles in Youths That Matters, where he currently volunteers as a live science reviewer. Zuzana is a Slovak student and an incoming freshman at Stanford University with a tireless passion for biology, especially neuroscience. She has been interning in laboratories since 14 and participated in research of neurodifferentiation and COVID-19 diagnostics development. She loves learning and discovery more than anything else, which is why she aims to dedicate her life to science. Shalini aspires to use innovation across the sciences, from quantum computing to genetics, to change the world. Both science and writing are great passions of hers. She firmly believes in taking risks and speaking out, and wants to center young people in science, like everyone in Youth STEM, to tackle major global issues with an ambitious and creative drive. We also have Aditi, who's yet to join us, but might join us later due to some technical difficulties. However, Aditi is a rising senior with a deep interest in biomedical research regarding the cellular and molecular mechanisms behind neurological diseases. Additionally, she's highly passionate about improving the quality of healthcare and reducing the cost of care for patients. To that end, she hopes to pursue a specialty in the medical field before ultimately working in hospital administration. So hopefully she can join us later. But apart from that, can you all now agree that indeed our fantastic speakers are indeed brilliant? It's great to have you as part of our discussion today, guys. Don't forget to add in your questions for the panel speakers as well. So I'm really excited. This is going to be a super friendly conversation between us 4 to see how you guys have made such an amazing impact in STEM, and it's just brilliant. So yeah, don't forget to pop in your questions for them. All right. So our first question to warm us up a bit is for all of you guys. All right. So you've all had different experiences researching. Could you tell us a little bit about how your journey in research has been so far? Maybe we can start with you, Susanna.
All right, so as you already mentioned in your great introduction. I had an opportunity to join research when I was 14, and I started in the field of developmental neurobiology. Thus, I basically researched the area of turning stem cells into neural tissues in petri dishes. And during my first year, I've actually formed a 2D neural tissue model, which is called neural rosettes. And so I basically formed neural rosettes from stem cells. And the following year, I had the opportunity to research a similar topic, which, but it was slightly different because it wasn't neural rosettes that time. It were actually brain organoids. So I formed the mini brains from stem cells under supervision of great scientists. And in the following year, because of the pandemic, I felt the urge to kind of combine my curiosity for biochemistry and my need to have an impact. And I joined the team that's been developing COVID-19 diagnostic tests. So that's been my 3 years of research journey so far.
I think that's incredible. Honestly, when I see young people like this, getting active and involved, it's just so awe-inspiring, and I think everyone probably agrees. Now, you guys might be thinking that, not everyone might have the opportunity to sort of get into the lab, but despite that, Shalini and Olayemi are going to tell us about how they also started researching, but slightly different. Olayemi, do you want to start?
Okay. I actually think the research I can remember very vividly is my undergraduate research. I worked on antibiotic resistance in clinical isolates and some organisms from the environment. And it's just quite interesting because I learned a lot from the project. I learned the concepts of patience and tenacity in research. I also worked with sulfur nanoparticles as an alternative to antibiotics. That was majorly the work I did. And it showed some promising results that sulfur nanoparticle could actually be an alternative to antibiotics if explored further. So I think that's basically what I've done so far.
Yeah, that's also absolutely incredible. So Charlotte, what's about you?
So, I mean, I've always been quite curious about science, obviously, as everyone here would be. So I think my research journey probably started last year during lockdown. Got the opportunity to write an article for the Youth STEM Matters journal, and it was on the evolution of viruses. I think that taught me a lot about research and, how much effort it takes to research in STEM, because there's so much information out there and you need to be able to kind of pick through it and find out what is interested in, what you are interested in, what's relevant to you. And since then, I've also written another article about biological sex differences and how they translate to gender identity, which should be published soon on Youth STEM Matters. And so, yeah, I think that's been my journey in research so far.
Yeah, I think yeah, you can go into a lab like Susanna, it's incredible work. We can also do these sort of things, and it's incredible that you guys got involved. So, proactively, I think it's incredible. So, we're now going to explore exactly a few different things. So the first thing that we're going to explore now is further into your journey in STEM and sort of making a difference. So, Shelly and Elaine, you have both written science communication pieces for Youth STEM. How did you both get started, and what inspired you? Maybe Shelly, you'd like to start?
So for me personally, I got started in lockdown. I think we were all quite bored through lockdown, so I was looking for something to, kind of hone my curiosity and answer some questions. And I came across the Youth STEM Matters journal, and reading through all of the articles that all of these people have published and all the research that young people have been able to publish on this organization, I really wanted to get involved. And what inspired me was I have a very great interest in evolutionary biology, and especially that of viruses, because viruses, while they are so different to us and of course so relevant now, especially, they are also very similar to humans as well in the way that they evolve. And that's always been really interesting to me, because the way that viruses evolve is something that we can study to see how humans evolve. And that was a very interesting parallel for me to draw. So that was what inspired me to write my first article, which was on the evolution of viruses, and then get it published on the Youth STEM Matters journal.
For me, it's quite similar story with Shalini. I just came across Youth STEM Matters last year, and I was impressed by the work young people were doing at Youth STEM Matters, and I wanted to be part of it. I stopped writing articles a long time before I discovered Youth STEM Matters, and I was really, really impressed by the work they do, and I wanted to be part of it. So I wrote my first article, and it was a really good one, because the team at Youth STEM Matters were really supportive, and it's one of the reasons I opted to be part of them, not just by writing an article, but to be part of the team. And that is why I'm a life sciences reviewer at Youth STEM Matters today.
Great, thank you so much, Shalini and Olayemi. Sorry, I realize there's some technical difficulties, so I'll continue with questions that she has prepared for you guys. So, although lab work is extremely important, it's really hard to find opportunities to conduct such projects. Despite this, there are other ways to get involved in research and exploring your scientific curiosity. So I guess, Shalini, my question would be for you, is with your science communication articles, do you feel like you learned quite a bit through having researched around the viruses and sort of gender differences and all?
Yeah, so I would say that it's definitely taught me a lot, especially as I was saying, reading through everyone else's pieces has taught me a lot about, I think something really important in science, especially with young people, is learning how to think critically about the sources that you go through when you're doing research. And especially when I was writing the article about gender differences, it's a topic that, while it's especially linked to neuroscience, and gender science and neuroscience are both topics that don't have a huge amount of solid research being done into them. Like, there are not a lot of complete things that you can say are complete fact within these sciences, which means when I was doing all of the research, I had to really pick through those sources and really think about, think about what kind of sources they were and what kind of studies were being done. And often I think that when you're writing an article like that, you come across sources that won't necessarily support the point that you're trying to make, but they are still important pieces of research in science. So I think it did definitely teach me a lot about kind of the art of researching and how much detail you have to go into when you're writing an article, because you really need to cover everything in detail so as to properly communicate your point, but also do it in a way that everyone can understand and that is widely accessible, because that's an important part of science as well, making it accessible.
Absolutely. I think you would bang on there in terms of accessibility and making sure you're not just looking at something from a single lens, but rather taking every single part of the picture into account. So I'm going to ask you some questions about sort of what each of you have done specifically. So Zuzana, you've obviously been doing some research on your rosette formations. Could you tell us about why that sort of field of research is important within developmental biology and what the implications are of your work?
All right, so as we all know, probably, or we might not know it, but it's generally the fact that embryogenesis, or anything that's happening during prenatal development, it's hugely under-researched, and we don't know that much about it because it's just so hard to research it non-invasively. So developing in vitro tools, so tools which can be used in lab, is really vital to actually understand what's going on when the baby and different tissues of the embryo's body are being developed. And specifically in our research, what we're targeting is development of neural tissue, and we're trying to develop and analyze different tools which can potentially be used to understand what's actually going on when the embryo is being developed, when their central nervous system is being developed. And it's only about the knowledge for the sake of knowledge kind of thing. It's also from perspective of medicine, it's extremely vital, because there are many neural tube defects which happen during embryogenesis, like spina bifida, or many other terrible things which lead to really harsh lives of the babies. And for us to develop treatments, we firstly need to understand what's actually going on during those processes, which is why the research of neurodifferentiation and generally the use of stem cells in this research is very vital.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the time what we tend to focus on is the end product of research. We don't quite look at those initial stages that actually led to the final product. So what you're doing with NeuroRosettes is incredibly important. And whilst it's very much a initial stage, like you said, it could lead to very sort of efficacious therapeutics or intervention strategies later on. So Shalini, so what would you say is an important aspect of science communication, especially when trying to portray sort of the history, the context, and the importance of sort of scientific ideas, like you did in your article about the evolution of viruses?
So obviously thinking critically, as I said, is a very important part of science communication. Also, I think when we're looking at the development of scientific ideas and the progress that we can have in the future, I think looking at history and context is actually really important in what we might do in the future. You know, the past of science and scientific research, ideas nowadays are built on the sort of scientific process of, you know, coming up with an idea, finding new evidence, maybe disproving a few ideas, and then coming up with new ones. So I think understanding the context behind a science, especially for viruses, because you know, up until around the early 1900s, when, you know, newer microscopes were invented, we couldn't even see viruses. And so they were kind of very mysterious to us. We didn't really know what was going on with them. But now, through new developments, we do know what's going on with them, and kind of see that science of like infection and pathogens and things like that. You know, it's important to understand the context behind it, because a lot of those ideas had something in them, but may have not been completely correct. And so by knowing those ideas, we can, and building on them, we can kind of push ourselves into the future, and we can push those scientific ideas forward. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, getting young people as well inspired about sort of the progression of, you know, like viruses, for example, as you really, as you quite excellently did in your article that you wrote. So, Oluyemi, within your science communication piece about meningitis, you linked to quite different viruses and the pathology and the virology behind them. So could you tell us a bit about your article that you wrote with us, and the importance of sort of shedding new light onto a previously known topic, or writing a topic that's quite novel, but providing a different insight, perhaps?
Well, I think when we talk about science in general, it's very important to create links between topics. I think it gives us a more generalized, it lets us see places where more research needs to be done. It creates new knowledge, and I think that was generally what the article was about. HIV and AIDS has been around for a long while, and the same thing has been the fungal disease of cryptococci meningitis. And linking those two, it's mainly, I think, when you look at HIV, I saw a lot of HIV patients in my third year in school, and these people, they have a low CD4 cell count, and that means they have a compromised immune system. And people with compromised immune system, not just HIV patient, they are also people that have cancer. They are prone to develop other diseases because of their weakened immune system. Their immune system cannot protect them against other viral, other etiological agents it would normally protect them from. So here in Nigeria, when you go to the northern part of the country, you see a lot of people with cryptococci meningitis, and this disease causes about 15% of HIV and AIDS deaths. So I think it's very relevant to show the link that when you have HIV, you don't necessarily die from the virus itself. You can die from other infection that just come because your immune system is weakened and compromised.
Right. Thanks, Olivia. Adirose, I think we can hear you, so I'm gonna pop off and let you
Right.
continue.
Hi again, everyone. I'm really sorry for those tech issues. I'm back on stronger internet, so hopefully that should be okay. But I did manage to hear what you guys were saying, and it was incredible. So please do keep going. And just to add on to what you were saying, Alayami, I think it's just so important to make those links and find those links in literature as well. And we have Aditi joining us right now, which is incredible. Aditi, can you hear us? Yeah? Well, she might join us in a bit. It seems like the technical difficulties today are quite severe, but hopefully she'll be okay. We still have some questions to go. So, you guys have explored a little bit about your journey in STEM. So we're going to go and, focus on a bit about how the audience can also get started. So it's quite clear that all of you are quite confident with what you're doing, and that's absolutely impressive. Why do you think you should keep doing what you're doing, and why others should also join you? So maybe we can start with Shalini.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us who want to go into STEM but are quite young, it seems a very unwelcoming world. It seems like you can only be a part of STEM if you're, really advanced and you've done all of these incredible things over your career, which is a great thing. But at the same time, I think it's important to know that if you are young and you have a passion for STEM and you want to get involved, there are so many ways, just like youth STEM, to get involved in those things. And I think that young people have a quite unique perspective on the world that you don't really get. And it's a perspective that is really important in STEM, because this is the world that we're growing up in. This is the world that we are going to get the opportunity to change. And if we start young, then, the things that you're passionate about, if you start practicing them from a young age, like for me, it was science and also writing. Like those things were two things that I really cared about. And by doing it from a young age, especially for youth STEM matters, it's made me gain a lot of confidence, which means when I do kind of grow up and start getting more seriously into a STEM career, it will be really helpful to know that I've done all of these things in the past.
Yeah, I think that's probably what most people that get involved feel, and I think that's just the power of sort of getting involved and taking that first step. And you never know, loads of other people will join like in your footsteps, which is beautiful, hopefully. Susanna, what do you think?
I think from my perspective, it's extremely important to find something that you love way more, or you love to the point that you can overcome the fear you have out of those stereotypes regarding young people that Shalini touched on. Because, for instance, I was a 14-year-old when I started my research career, and people thought I was crazy when I was applying to labs. They're like, "You're a kid. Why would you work with stem cells? You're a kid. How could you understand how a brain works?" And I think it's really, really important to remind yourself that curiosity is something that is way more important than what other people think. It's way more important than all those conventions we're surrounded by. So it's really vital to be brave, and to be brave enough to reach into topics that seem way above your comfort zone, because that's how you gain the expertise. And through gaining the expertise, you can become brave enough to reach out to people and join research that's actually pioneering in the topic you've just been recently studying. So really, it's vital to find something that really spurs your curiosity to the point that you stop caring about society and care about science way more than about anything else. Just be brave.
I think that's some really wise words there, and coming from a person who sort of experienced those comments, like, who are you, like, your age, and just like, you know what, you're too young to do this, like, this is not your place, and you know what, you proved them wrong. And I feel like that's really powerful. Hopefully you guys will see Zana's article published very soon. It's incredible, your work with neural rosettes. Yeah, so Aditi has joined us, which is absolutely phenomenal, because there's some other important things that I also want to touch on. And then we'll get back to you, Alayami, as well. So Aditi's work reviewing literature is also really important, if not more important than actual research, because we need to know what we already know to progress forward. And Shell and OAME have written science communication articles and trying to increase awareness about topics, linking topics, talking about their context in a novel way. And Aditi's done reviewing sort of literature. So Aditi, can you first tell us a little bit about your journey into research? And then I want to know, how did you develop the interest to pursue reviewing literature?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I'm sorry that I'm late because of technical difficulties. But oddly enough, I actually first started doing my literature review after I was shut out from lab because of COVID. So, my first experience into research was actually hands-on research. But I found that so much of research is actually supplemented by literature review and what other past people have done, because, the whole point of publishing articles and literature is actually to help other people and realize that what you've done supplements their own research. So when I first started writing the review article, I found that, especially with like cancer therapies, which is the topic I was dealing with, there was so much past literature that referenced each other, and that forms the basis for like wet lab research. So, I think a lot of times we overlook the importance of literature and published work already, but you have to understand that so much of it is like the motivation and driver for current research. So for example, if you're looking at a literature review, you can find possible gaps in the current research you're doing, or you can look at like the variables and the controls that past people used as a supplement to what you should be using. So I found that so much of what we're doing, like through literature review, is really like a driving factor of hands-on research. So it's absolutely very important.
Yeah, I think that really makes sense, because how can we go forwards if we don't know the history, essentially? And so you've sort of gone in and looked at the patterns, trying to figure out sort of where the links are between different research that's been done in the past. So what can we learn from it for future research, Aditi? You've done lots of reviewing about cancer immunotherapies. What can we learn about that for the future?
Absolutely. So I think there's like a pattern that kind of emerges when you're looking at literature review, and it's that everyone is almost looking at a different part of the topic, so someone might be focusing on one area, or someone might be looking at a different perspective. So I think one thing to learn from literature review is that the whole point of it, of course, is share knowledge and disseminate that work, is that you can you can find further research after doing a literature review. So for example, let's say you find a gap in something that you're doing, and that serves as a possible experiment that can be done in the future. Or if you're looking for like the perfect chemical to use, that's obviously, that's likely someone must have used the previous listed limitations, the pros and cons. So I think something really important is that when you're doing a project and you're designing an experiment, is that you have to see what research has been done in the past, because, of course you want to repeat something that we already know, but also you learn so much from seeing what others have done. And, you can't, you can collaborate with the researchers next to you or in like the universities next to you, but you don't know what people across the world are doing, which is why literature review is perfect for ensuring that everyone is kind of up to date, and why it's really important that we communicate that you are looking at the past and what others have done.
Yeah, and it's incredible that you're doing this, and you guys hopefully will see Aditi's article on cancer immunotherapy soon. So Dizan has done lots of research work. Aditi has done some research and is, doing review. Shows that we can do, like young people can do different things. Sometimes we don't have the opportunity to code in lab, but it doesn't mean we can't write some science communication. It doesn't mean we can't raise awareness about topics. So you guys have all been involved in Youths and Matters. And OAME, this question's for you. How did you find the peer review process at Youths and Matters? Did it help you? How was it?
I was saying earlier that I hadn't written an article for quite a long time before I discovered Youths and Matters, and I think I had much confidence at the time, and the peer review process, I had someone that was basically walking me through the process. I was sent a guide. I was helped with picking the right image that conformed, and I was basically helped through the process. And while it was my article, at the end of the day, I knew it was much more better than I could have done on my own. And I would just say the peer review process is seamless and it's really helpful. It helps you, you build your confidence, you see a difference in your writing skills, and you see someone give you really insightful feedbacks.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's the sort of the beauty of peer review is that you get opinions from other scientists working in your field or other young people working in your field that have been trained to do that. And Zuzana, what about you? How is your, because you've been working on a research article, slightly different. How has the feedback been for you?
I think it's been such a wonderful process for me. I think I've grown so much as a scientific writer because it's one thing to come up with a research idea, another thing to carry out the experiments, and a whole another thing to actually put it into a research paper and present it in a correct way. And I haven't really been trained in that before, even though I co-authored one paper before that, but it's never been just me writing it. It's been really, really a wonderful experience over here. And people that have reviewed my articles gave me such wonderful advice, and I've learned so much. And I think it made me such a better science communicator just by reading those reviews and reading that feedback and building my paper based on that feedback. It's been really incredible, and I'm really thankful for being given that opportunity because it's really important to hear feedback from others to actually improve yourself as a scientist.
Yeah, and that sort of highlights the importance of reflection as well, and just sort of, I think it's incredible, like having that mindset to take on feedback, improving your work. I think just kudos to you all really for being part of this, and I think it's powerful as youth that we can do this regardless of how old we are. We can still make a difference, and I think that's what we all want you to take away from this. But to really sum up, what would you want young people and professionals alike to take home about the impact that young people can make through research? Maybe we can start with Shalini.
I would say that if you, and I think Susanna like touched upon this earlier, if you have a real love for something, if you have a real passion for a topic, there shouldn't be anything stopping you from getting out there and sharing your opinion. It's so important to hear young people's perspectives. And, you know, all you have to do is have a passion for a topic, and you can get out there and, you know, overcome any of the barriers that you have in front of you just by sort of having that ambition to do something with what you love. And yeah, nothing else should matter about that. You should just be able to do what you love and, you know, change the world in the process. So I think the main thing I would say to take away is, you know, don't be scared. Just kind of go for it. Just take those leaps. You are a young person, but you have the right to take up these spaces and to be part of these communities that are sharing ideas, and your ideas are like worth it. They are worth hearing. So I would say, yeah, just take the leap.
Yeah, I think that's that's a really good way to sum it up. What about you, Olayemi? What would you tell young people?
Oh, I've been there in the I'm not good enough yet. I think I need to probably get a master's degree. Maybe when I get a PhD, then I can make a real difference. But I think it's one of the things that I like about Houston Matters. That perspective has changed, and I would want other young people to also know that they can take active roles in actually solving the problems of our time. When we leave it to the adults, they don't have the perspective we have. They actually live in this world for us, and we also need to know that we need to take care of what will be left to us.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Aditi?
Yeah, I thought Olayemi brought up a really great point, is that, you know, we often applaud experienced professionals for their wisdom, but on the other hand, you have, you know, youth who bring a new perspective that's like fresh and a new mindset to problem solving that I think we really need to emphasize. And also one more like almost like piece of advice is someone that also has trouble getting into research, especially someone that's young. I would just emphasize that there's a lot of non-traditional approaches you can take that allow you to kind of step your foot in. And from there, it's so much easier once you get like your first grasp or your first experience. It's so much easier to go from there and find what you're actually interested in. So definitely explore and find out what you like and just pursue that.
Yeah, and Susanna.
I think we all of you collectively gave really great advice to our listeners currently. But what I would add on to that is that I think it's important to keep in mind that regardless of who you are, there's always going to be something that's going to try to kind of stand between you and your career in science, whether it's your socioeconomic background, lack of opportunities, even your gender, sometimes even can be your family, it can be anything. And it's going to be tough to get over those things. But I think it's really important to remember that it's always worth it. Science and learning is always worth it because it's a limitless world, Eddie. And the moment you enter this world, you have nowhere to finish because it's just expanding. You think you know something, and then you realize there's such a space for improvement, and you think you reach the borders. But the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. So it's really important to indulge in this process, and by that overcome all the barriers that are between you and your passion. And that's how you actually become a really happy scientist.
I think that's excellent advice, and I think words of inspiration, I think, for everyone. And I think it's a great place to be finishing off. I mean, this was such an inspiring conversation, and we could have been going on for so much longer. You guys are young people that are making a difference to the world despite your age. It proves that everyone can do it, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender identity, everything. You can do it, and we are doing it because we are doing it. So there are a few questions that we haven't managed to get to from the audience, perhaps. So if you guys have time to answer those in the chat, I'd be really grateful. But now we have a very quick break so that we can start our next session at 2:40 p.m. BST. And I'll be passing it over to Julia, who will be introducing you to our next couple of speakers in a minute. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming with us. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but thank you for staying with us. And